Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to CFES Brilliant Pathways College and Career Speaker Series. My name is John Rydell, and our goal throughout the year has been to bring individuals from different careers to you and kind of expose you to what those careers are like and how that person got to where they are. Today's guest, someone that went to my high school that has gone on to become really one of America's most well-known animators. I'm going to let him tell a story because I think it's really interesting to I'm looking at all the kids we have and students today from all across upstate New York, Vermont, not just across the lake where Jeff and I went to high school at Virgins. I see we've got 300 students from Herman J. Russell Middle School in Atlanta, which is great. We've got Beekmantown all across New York. So I think it's relatable when Jeff tells a story about where he came from, which is not unlike where we are here, and how he got to where he is now. He started his career in 91, prior to 1991, but he joined Pixar Animation Studios, who I'm sure you're all quite aware of, and worked on, it's a lengthy list, but Toy Story, Bugs Life, Toy Story 2, Monsters Inc., one of my favorites, and it goes on and on. But I'm going to turn it over to Jeff because he's got some really great examples of his work, and I think his story is really fascinating and interesting to hear. So I'll turn it over to you, Jeff.
Hi, thanks. Thanks and good morning, everybody. Or I guess, well, it's morning for me. Let's put it that way. So it's 2 o'clock?
Yeah.
So good afternoon. Anyway, I just, I put together this presentation. The title seems a little pretentious, but I was just trying to think of this is how I made my way into animation and got to do it for a living, type of thing, which was basically, what I wanted to do. I started out, and I've been drawing ever since I was a little kid. I'm like 3 years old here, and I don't remember a time when I wasn't drawing. Like I was always drawing something. And here's like an early example. I'm not sure how old I was when I drew this, but I think I was in the single digits. And as you can see, my early influences were, Jim Henson and the Muppets, especially Sesame Street, Dr. Seuss, a comic book artist named Carl Barks, who was specialized in doing Donald Duck comics and Uncle Scrooge comics, which have some of the best writing in funny animal books, maybe some of the best writing in comics, period. And then you may recognize the guy on the left. He was designed by a designer named Ed Benedict, and he did a lot of stuff for Hanna-Barbera. A lot of the characters that you may know, type of thing, were probably designed by him. And these were all artists that I really liked as a kid. And especially, I still am a massive Charles Schulz and Peanuts fan. I've been reading the books ever since I was little, and that was actually my first goal going into art, was that I wanted to be a comic strip cartoonist. I wanted to have a comic strip like Peanuts. So I've managed to do a little of that, where I got some comics in my hometown newspaper, which the Enterprise in Vermonter, which is no longer around, but I did some comics about high school and, just, things about whatever, like the cafeteria and the library, things that things that and you're doing. I got to do the cover of my high school yearbook, which was fun.
I have that one actually. That's interesting to know you did that.
Yeah, I had some drawings on the inside too. Like I was able to kind of have a theme that went all through, because I think the prom theme was magic power, so that's why it's all sort of wizardy and stuff. So I was going along and doing this stuff and sort of like trying to learn how to draw just by practice. Like I sometimes I would copy things from comic books or ads or things. Um, and so I was just drawing a lot, trying to get better. And but I wasn't really sure, again, at this point, I was still thinking like, okay, I want to be like some of my other heroes, that I want to make a comic strip. I want to be in the newspaper. And then I saw Star Wars and everything changed for me. Like a lot of people my age, Star Wars was a big deal. Um, I grew up with, Benji movies and, stuff like that. So seeing Star Wars just like blew my head open. It was like, and it was one of the first, it probably not the first film, there's been lots of movies that have done making of stuff in history, but this for me was the first time that I got to see how movies were made, where you got to see magazine articles and television specials, and they would show you like, oh, here's the stop motion animator, and he's doing this thing with a puppet, and here's this fella in a suit, and here's the guy with the spaceship miniature and stuff. And I was just entranced by all of it, and I wanted to work on movies. So to me, I thought, well, I just did math and I went, mental math, and I went, well, filmmaking plus drawing equals animation. So I'll do animation because that kind of puts everything together, type of thing, since I like to draw so much. And remember, my senior year was 1983. There was no internet. The animation industry was not in good shape. Like it was all, I hesitate to sort of denigrate any of the shows that were on at the time, because everything has a fan base. Like no matter what I say, someone will be like, I loved that show. I was passionate about it. But for me, looking at what was going on was not inspiring. A lot of them were just, based on toys, and they weren't, I did not think they were very clever or very imaginative. So that was not looking good. But the main advantage I had in terms of going out and picking a career is that I knew what I wanted to do and I knew how I wanted to do it. And what I mean by how is that when I went to, so how could I do this? And what I mean by, how I could do it is we had a college fair at my high school. I went to talk to the rep of the college that I thought might have a good animation program. And by college fair, I mean a bunch of fold out tables in the parking lot. Like it was not, I don't even know what they would be like now, but this was not a fancy thing. It was just basically a bunch of reps with tables and paperwork in the school parking lot. So I went to the Rhode Island School of Design table because that seemed the closest to someone that would know what I was talking about. I told them I wanted a curriculum that was really committed to animation. And that's what I mean by I knew how I wanted to do it, in the sense that I did not want to go to a school that basically had, a camera in a closet and they had no teachers that had any knowledge of it. It's like, well, if you just want to use the, materials, we've got them here. That's not what I wanted. I wanted a staff that had experience, that had been in the industry, or was still in the industry currently, along with those things. I was not enough of a self-starter that I wanted to just have, an Oxbury camera in a closet or something. So I talked to them about that. And basically they said, oh, I think you want to go to CalArts, which is the California Institute of the Arts. So I wrote to CalArts and I got, their envelope full of pamphlets and things. And they had a whole description of how you would apply to the animation program, of course, which was very helpful. And so ultimately, again, in those days, there were not a lot of options. I only knew of two schools that I thought could kind of be something I would want to do. The first one is the Joe Kubert School of Cartoon and Graphic Art, and that's in New Jersey. So it had the advantage of being closer to home. And then CalArts as well, which was completely across the country and probably far more expensive. So uh, the way I realized that, you know, there's only so much experience I can share with you that's applicable, in the sense that, you know, I was going to school in the early 80s. And so much has changed since then, especially cost. But on the other hand, you have so many more options to choose from. There's tons of stuff online. There's a lot more schools that have animation programs because the industry is much more prosperous than it was then. Anyway, so I basically it came down to two schools, but I do think the thing that is applicable that I can tell you is I looked at what the schools produced, and these were some ads, and I'm going to put a disclaimer at the end of this, but these are the ads I saw coming out of the Joe Kubert school. And basically I saw ads and they all sort of looked like him. They all sort of, you know, and Joe, no, you know, no shade on Joe Kubert. He's an amazing, he was an amazing cartoonist. Like, his comic work is stellar. But the thing that bothered me was everybody coming out of school looked like they were kind of drawing like, and that I wasn't into that. Because I didn't want to go to school just to look like Joe Kubert's work. And the short films and things that I saw, and just reading about the alumni that had gone on from Cal Arts, you know, was really eye-opening. And it was like, okay, that's where I want to go. Honestly, I think the only other option I didn't even know about, which was Sheridan in Canada. And to this day, I'm not sure if people outside of the country can go there. I'm kind of assuming they can. But anyway, I didn't even know about Sheridan. So really, it came down to these two. So, you know, they had these instructions about, you know, oh, well, talk about a movie you've seen and, you know, do some artwork. And so I did a bunch of drawings. I only have a couple here. I have the cover, which of course I you know, rendered the heck out of it. And, you know, and then the rest was sort of black and white because that was what I was more comfortable with. You know, and I tried to draw some, you know, I didn't really do life drawing per se, but I went out and I drew sort of landscapes with a felt tip pen, you know, and I had these, it was like, you know, winter, and I had these gloves on that had, you know, like those Oliver Twist gloves with the fingers cut off so I could draw. And so I did some things like that. And then I had this character, like the guy chasing the camera, I called him Floyd. And then I had, you know, I drew Floyd in different expressions and different poses. And you know, I drew different situations with like different animals and, you know, different, like, you know, robots and whatever. So I just tried to, you know, and then they had a sort of a written section, you know, and so I tried to write these little sort of essays about, you know, films and stories I had read and seen, and how they made an impression on me and why I thought they were good and everything. And I sent it in, and fortunately I got accepted. So I started going there. I took a year off. Like, at that time it wasn't called a gap year, but I basically took a gap year and just hung out at home. But in the fall of '84, I went to school. And, you know, so when I got there, there was all kinds of different assignments, you know, animation assignments, of course, and color and design assignments, and layout assignments, and all kinds of, you know, different things that you would learn the building blocks of animation, or at least 2D animation, which a lot of it does transfer over. I mean, it's all the same principles, really. So it's not that different. So I just tried to do as many of the assignments as possible. Here's a few of the things I did when I was in college, where one of them was, you know, I think one of them was just to draw, like, I don't know, 4 or 5 different ducks. And so I drew these ducks. And then one of them was drawing the characters from The Wizard of Oz, but caricaturing people in your class. So the one I have here is the Scarecrow, and I just drew it as myself. And then I drew the Tin Man and the Cowardly Lion and Dorothy. I drew the rest of them as different, classmates. So this was all stuff I sort of, I did it, so I just tried to do a lot of the, I did when I was there for 4 years, and I made 2 short films, which to me aren't very good, but I did try to some people poured all their energy into their films. Some people like me, they pour all their energy into their assignments. And so I guess I would say the one that a great short film is a great portfolio piece, and having a ton of artwork that you can look through and go, oh, okay, well, I'll put this in and that. I had a good amount of portfolio fodder for the future. In the end, I did get a degree. I got a BFA, and is that necessary? Well, my parents asked me to do that, and since they were paying for it and doing all the work with the financial aid and all of that, I felt like that was only reasonable. Okay, I'll get the degree. In terms of the industry, it's not necessary at all. You honestly, if your portfolio is good enough, you could go in with no school whatsoever and get a job. Like if you have that level of instinctive knowledge of these principles, whether you even are aware of them or not, like if you can do the work, honestly, nobody cares about the paperwork. The one thing I would say about the degree is that that it does show, like, okay, here was this program, I committed effort to it, I got good, I got decent grades, therefore I got the degree. And let's say at the end of it all, you go into animation, you go, oh, this isn't for me, like for whatever reason. And there are people who just don't stay with it. And it's not a matter of perseverance, it's just not for them for whatever reason. So you still have a degree that you could go out and, okay, it's not necessarily applicable to things, but it shows that, again, you've expended this effort towards a program. And like in the job market, like the first sweep of the sickle is, do you have a degree? Before they even ask any other questions, there's usually a degree requirement of some kind. So on that level, as sort of a plan B thing that you have in your back pocket, it is valuable. In the industry, it doesn't mean a lot. And then the next big question is college necessary at all? Technically, no. Like I say, if you're just sort of innately talented and you understand without even, like if you are a very good draftsperson and you can animate well, whether you're on the computer or you're drawing yourself or whatever, you have a great eye for color and all these things, then you don't necessarily need school in that sense because you've got the building blocks for the work. But that being said, I think college was was really important for me in the sense that I was coming from Vermont and going to California, and I was meeting all kinds of different people. And granted, I was a little bit of a hermit crab, and I kind of stayed to myself. But there was a certain amount of, just by definition, being in this other state, I was meeting people from all over the place, and that was really helpful because growing up, I just didn't have that growing up in Vermont, and so socialization to me is huge. Because you're meeting people who are just whatever, they're different from you, and and you just need to learn if you're not already good at it, you just need to how to interact with people, and that's kind of to me what part of what college is about. Is I feel like it's sort of becoming it's starting on the path of going on the way to being an adult and sort of learning how to deal with other people. And you know, some people get that early in high school, and I don't really feel like I did. I feel like I went to college for 4 years, which at CalArts is very unusual. Most people don't go the full four. They might go a year or two, and then they usually bail and they go and get a job, as soon as they can, because less college equals less money and more work equals more money. So but for me, in a way, I sort of felt like I needed to stay in the oven a little longer, and I needed to kind of bake more and be type of thing. And I wanted to work and refine my skills more too. So that, I think, is, because I know school is horribly expensive now, and I would feel a little guilty telling you, like, oh yeah, just go to CalArts like I did. It's so much more expensive now than when I went, that I don't, and I think the main uh, uh, detriment to an online course or something like that would be the fact that you're not getting as much interaction, and I think that's important. So that's something to weigh. Anyway, so I was very lucky that um, you know I think some of the elements to talk about here, like ability and technical ability and skill and personality and being able to work with others, that's all extremely important. And then some of it is just not in your control. Some of it is just timing. And I had excellent timing in the sense that while I was in school, if you looked at the animation industry like a flower, it was like this shriveled little bud. And like over those 4 years, it started opening up again, where The Little Mermaid came out and Roger Rabbit came out, and they made money. And then people were like, hey, these don't have to be just for kids, that we can watch cartoons on television, and like, people were, because like people of, say, my parents' age, for them, cartoons and animation, that was stuff you chucked over your shoulder, once you reached a certain age and you just got to work and, whatever your job was going to be. But that was sort of shifting in the culture, where there was a generation coming up that didn't want to leave it behind, and that enjoyed it and wanted to make things that they could watch now and enjoy, and they could make them for their kids and enjoy just as much. So it wasn't just like shoved over to a certain age bracket. So the industry was changing, and it was starting to flourish. And I got summer work working with Ralph Bakshi, who he made a lot of animated features in the 70s, mostly in the 70s, and into the 80s a little bit. So you might know about Fritz the Cat, you might know about Hey Good Looking, or American Pop, or things like that. And I was watching this stuff, and in a way, they're perfect films to watch in college. They feel like very much like, they're very aggressively like, we don't want to be Disney type of thing. So it's like college is a perfect introduction. So I watched a few of them in college, and I found them really interesting, and I started becoming a fan. And so I got to work with him for a couple of summers on, he created this new Mighty Mouse show, because Mighty Mouse was sort of a 50s character, a 40s and 50s character. They did all these cartoon shorts, which Ralph had also worked on when he worked at Terry Toons in New York. And he, on the spur of the moment, he got this idea to go, let's make Mighty Mouse again. And so I worked with him for a couple of summers. It was like a season and a half, and it was a lot of fun. Ralph was really unpredictable, but he was a really good first boss, in the sense of, he was very he gave you a very free, he gave you a lot of rein, he gave you a lot of rope. And so I got to do a lot of really crazy stuff that I would never be able to do later on, you know. And so I worked on Mighty Mouse, like I say, for about a season and a half. And you know, these are actually drawings from Heavy Traffic. These are like copy drawings that I did when I was in college. So it was kind of funny that I actually got to work with it because I just didn't know that was going to be a thing. And then there were a few projects after Mighty Mouse. Ralph tried to get something else going where he did a pilot called Houndtown. He did a pilot called Tattertown. You know, for the most part, they just sort of aired and then they disappeared. And then he did a television special based on the Butter Battle book, which is one of the later Dr. Seuss books. So I got to meet Dr. Seuss too, which was amazing. And I had a meeting. We went to La Jolla when Dr. Seuss was still around, obviously, and I went to his house. And so it was, I don't know if you know who Maurice Noble is, but he was a wonderful designer. He worked on a lot of the old Warner Brothers cartoons. So basically it was Ralph Bakshi and Maurice Noble and Chuck Jones and me in this house. And I can't, that would be a whole story in and of itself, but it was like an amazing afternoon. And I included this drawing of one of the characters I did, and Chuck did a draw over and basically wrote, "Oh, the drawings look excellent for the Butter Battle book." And it's like, well, okay, I can't ask for anything more than that. You know, that was an amazing compliment to get. So after a couple of summers, you know, after those things, I went on to Tiny Toon Adventures and worked on that show for a little while. I think the main highlight there was at one point they were designing the cast and everybody was designed except Hampton, the pig. And no one could make Spielberg happy. He was the executive producer of the show and no one could make him happy. So they got desperate and they basically had a contest in a way, like an informal contest where they had anybody who wanted to try, they would have them design Hampton. And Spielberg picked mine, and you can see I'm very proud of this fact. So I'm sorry if it seems like I'm bragging, but I'm very proud of this fact where he picked it. This is not the drawing he picked. This is I think actually a better drawing, but that was like the highlight, I think, of that show. And I worked on it. That was another, I think, about a year and a half. I worked on it. And while I was working on it, I saw The Simpsons Christmas Special, which was basically the pilot for the series. And it was one of those things where I looked at the sense of humor and the cleverness of the writing. It's like, I want to work on that. That's what I want to do. So after about a year and a half, I left Tiny Toons and I went to work on The Simpsons. And I thought I'd talk a little bit about what I did. And depending on the show, like sometimes I would do full turnarounds of a character so that people could understand how to draw them at different angles. Sometimes, most of the time I did kind of ingredients that would go in what I would call like an animation kit. And then they would send it overseas and an overseas studio would finish the episode over there to save money because it was cheaper to do. So the ingredients, you know, you might have turnarounds. If it was a main character, you'd have a turnaround. If it was a tertiary character, probably not. You know, it probably might just have one drawing or a couple. Character layout might be if you had you have a scene and you're just drawing the character going through the absolute main poses, the bare bones of the acting or whatever. Mouth charts are just like what they sound like, where usually a character will have a cell level, which they don't really do anymore, but they used to have sheets of plastic called cells. They'd stack everything up. Now they do everything digitally. They composite it all digitally. It's kind of the same thing. There isn't physical plastic anymore. But anyway, you would do these charts of the different mouth shapes so that people could use them in dialogue, so that they're all the basic mouth shapes are already figured out for you. Character and prop designs are, just like what they sound like. And then background layout, I didn't do that very often, but every once in a while, somebody, there'd be they get in a pinch and they, oh, can you do the background for that? I'd be like, okay. Usually it was a tighter shot that didn't require, a ton of work type of thing, where it might be just like Art's desk in a classroom. It wasn't, a huge deal. But that was kind of the ingredients of like the 2D television animation I did, sort of starting out. And it's seasonal work. So basically I would work on a season of the show, however many episodes they had. And I didn't work on all the episodes. They would be split between different teams, headed up by different directors. But there'd come a certain point where all the work would be done, and then they'd have to go into the part of the cycle where they go back to the writers and go, okay, well, now we need to write more episodes, type of thing. They didn't have everything written all at once. They would write just enough to make a season, and then, okay, we'll start working on, if the show is doing well, they'd start working on the next season. If it wasn't, then they didn't, and the show would be canceled. But with The Simpsons, it was going along fine. So what was nice is that I could I could go from The Simpsons and get sort of, laid off there. And then I could go over to Warner Brothers, where I had worked earlier, and I helped do some development artwork for Tasmania, a different show that they did. So I helped them, I just did some development drawings and things. And then they were nice enough to be like, they didn't insist that I stay, or they weren't angry that I left. They'd just be like, okay, well, we'll see you later on. They liked my work. And then I could go back to The Simpsons. So I would just go back and forth. And so I was working on, I didn't work on season 1. I worked on, I think, all of season 2. And then I was working on season 3, and I got a phone call. And it was from a friend of mine that I had gone to school with, Andrew Stanton, who's on the left there. You may know him as the director of Finding Nemo and WALL-E. But I went to school with him. He was in my class. At one point, I actually had a house. He had a house near college, and we were actually sort of sharing the house. So I was like a housemate at one point. And he had gone up to Pixar already. And I don't know if you know what Pixar looked like in the early, late 80s, early 90s, but that industrial park building on the right, that's where Pixar was. And it was just over in Point Richmond, where Point Richmond was an unusual little town because it had there was like a little town, almost felt like a movie set, where they had like a statue and they had some stores and restaurants and things. And then not too far away, there was this massive Chevron refinery, and it was very industrial. So it was like this weird mix. And then there were cargo trains going by a lot. But anyway, Andrew had already moved up north and was working at Pixar. And he called me, and they had been doing television commercials and slowly sort of honing their craft and everything. And they called me, and it was like, well, we want to make a full-length feature, because they had tried pitching. You've probably heard the story. They tried to pitch a Christmas special, and to try to take a middle step where it's like, okay, we may not be ready for like a giant project. But in the end, they were pitching it to Disney, and it was like, well, television specials are, in their own way, they're just as expensive as a movie, and they don't make as much money. So you may as well just go all the way and make a movie. So they're like, okay. And so Andrew called me. He's like, are you interested in helping us develop this movie? Which in the end, it turned out to be Toy Story. And that's an early drawing of Woody I did back when Woody was, when we were thinking about Woody as a ventriloquist doll, where he actually had the hinged jaw, which we gave up on really quickly because that jaw just says creepy from the second you see it. Nobody, there's no cute ventriloquist dolls. They're all uncomfortable. So I went to go apply there, and it was a very small place at that point, and I maybe 100 people, I'm not sure, but it was very small, and I was accustomed to going in with my portfolio. I had done not very many interviews, but I'd done a couple where you go in, you bring your portfolio, you sort of page through it, and they look at your work. Oh, that's very nice. And they talk with you for, I don't know, let's say a half hour. And it's like, all right, well, I don't remember. I think, and they might tell you whether you got the job right away, but most of the time it was like, well, we'll call you in a little bit. You're like, okay, so the whole thing might take an hour at the most. And I went to Pixar, and it was like, okay, well, we'll have this group of people come in, and like, at that time there was, Andrew and John Lasseter, and we were talking about movies and directors we liked and going through, and that took a while. And then like other people came in, where like some of the technical artists came in, all very nice. And then I kind of went through it again, and I went through it again, and like more, I felt like I got interviewed by like everybody. And it took most of the day. And it was just this weird, like, when is this going to stop? Like I liked everybody. They were all really nice, but it was, to me, very unusual. And I guess that's more normal for a tech place, that the interviews are very long and very involved. And I mean, I was impressed in the sense of, I think they really wanted to get a sense of who I was and what kind of person I was, and are they going to be able to work with me and everything. It wasn't just like, yeah, you can do the work, who cares? So I was impressed that they cared enough to kind of be that thorough. But it was a little puzzling at first. So 30 years later, and I'm still here, and it's been an amazing ride, because the way I usually describe it is, a bunch of people from college that I knew came to work here. Some are still here, some have moved on, but I sort of describe it like you get together with some of your friends from college, or maybe even high school, and you start a lemonade stand, and then all of a sudden the lemonade stand is like, is like Coca-Cola, or like this giant company. And it didn't happen overnight, but it was such a wild thing to watch, like just to watch the company get bigger and bigger, and make more and more films and everything. And so it's been amazing. I feel, and just Toy Story alone is I feel like it's part of history, and that it's like a sort of a Snow White of its own, where it ushered in a whole new era of a different kind of animation that transformed everything. And as well as being, a movie I'm proud of. It's not just technique, it's something I'm really proud of, and I care about it. So that's kind of the journey. And I guess one of the other things that you might not get as much if you learn online is your friends, your classmates, because your classmates, you'll be working alongside them, when you leave school, type of thing. And you don't want to make it a real mercenary thing where it's like, oh, I'll make friends so that I have connections. But it just kind of turned out that way. Like so I do feel like that's an important factor as well, as the people, a lot of my classmates, like, Jim Reardon was head of story on Wall-E. Again, Andrew Stanton, Brenda Chapman, co-directed Brave. Trying to think, Rich Moore I went to school with, he directed Wreck-It Ralph. So I have a lot of, very talented friends that I went to school with, and they all sort of went into the industry and flourished. And that is something I don't know that you would get in an online thing. So that's something else to consider. The only thing I wanted to talk about after this was this syndrome that can happen where for me it was very specific in the sense that but I think there's a certain level of it in animation in general where it's like I came from a very homogenous background in terms of being in Vermont, and then going into animation in school and going through the program and going into the industry. It was mainly, Caucasian people, like, all the time, whether it was in Vermont or whether it's in college or in the industry. And I think the one thing I would encourage everybody now, because you're just starting, to think about all these things, is, if you're in that situation, to try to, because a lot of people tend to, when they go into animation, they tend to want to make what they already like. So you get Disney fans wanting to make Disney films, Pixar fans wanting to make Pixar films. Some of that's okay, but to a point, it kind of makes like this drawing here of the dragon eating its own tail, where it just kind of it can become kind of kind of inbred, and it can kind of hurt things to a degree. So I guess what I would encourage you to do is to reach out if you don't already know a lot of and do reach out and do research if you don't know about a lot of artists of color in the industry or outside of the industry, whether it's in comics or cartooning or animation. I would just reach out or I would recommend that you explore that world if you haven't already, because I feel like it will benefit everybody. You'll become more well-rounded, and hopefully that will help you avoid, if you have, there's always going to be biases and things, and there's always going to be stuff like that. But I feel like the more effort you put into reaching out and exploring different creators, that it will only help you in your work and type of thing. I wish I could have come up with a longer list. I only have 3 people here. I wish I could come up with a longer list, but I just wanted to get you started. Maury Turner is a cartoonist I knew as a kid growing up. He had a television show called Kid Power, and it was based on his comic strip called Wee Pals, where he had a very explicitly diverse cast. Like, that was something he really wanted to do. And this was, in the 70s. And, and that was a very groundbreaking thing at the time. I mean, it's still not typical. And he would, as you can see, like, he'd have the Soul Corner where he would inform people about, historical figures and things. The person, the next fellow in color here is Keith Knight, and I've been reading his stuff, I think, since probably the early 90s. I'm not sure, but he's had a strip called The K Chronicles. He has another one called Think. His stuff is very funny, and very, very political as well. He doesn't shy away from issues of the day, but his drawings are also really fun and expressive, and he's just very talented. And I really like and appreciate his voice in the comic world. The person on the right, I just found out about recently, and I feel kind of embarrassed that I've never heard of this guy before. I've been reading comics all my life, and I've been a big nerd about it. And all of a sudden, I learned about this guy, Oliver Harrington. And I don't think he had a nationally syndicated strip. I think his were more regional, but his artistry is gorgeous. His drawings are beautiful, and they're the sort of the point of view and the satire of it is really biting. Like they're pretty amazing. There aren't necessarily tons of examples of his work out there. I think a lot of his books are out of print, but you can find information about him online. Like I say, very talented guy that I kind of feel ashamed that I'd never learned about before. So I guess ultimately what I'm saying is I just feel like, if you're not already doing it, I feel like the more inclusive you can be in what you consume, what you read, and what you watch, the better off everybody will be. I still have a lot of work to do. I'm doing the best I can, but I still feel like sometimes I'm too narrow in my outlook. And so I just want to encourage that now because it's so early. And yeah, there's been the formative years, okay, but you can still, like, college is great for that, and so I would say, you know, whether you decide to, draw a comic strip of your own in like one of the, one of the free newspapers, and you can, however you can, whatever you want to do, I would just say, like, reach out, and because so much more of it is available than ever before, and it's so much easier than it's ever been, so uh I think that's it. So does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. That was great. The diversity piece is really interesting. We talk about a lot about the value of it, and to hear you bring it into a conversation about animation is interesting, and the importance and the power of it too. And many other areas that you talked about that we talk with students about essential skills, and you mentioned a lot of the importance of networking and perseverance and all these different things. And I'd love to have you talk a little bit more about when you and I spoke the other day, you talked about growing up and you're just the love and desire to just draw. I mean, you described it as like oxygen that you needed
Yeah.
to breathe. I mean, I find that fascinating, and it's also, I'll let you talk more about it because I love the parts that when you describe that, and you also talk about, you got to work hard and you got to do these things, but you got to have this general love for it. And eventually when you get to work at a particular job, you're going to need to be really good at it, at least have this passion that you had talked to me about. So if you could expand on that, that would be great.
Yeah, that's true. That is one of the things even just as you started to talk, that occurred to me in my head, like, oh yeah, I didn't mention that yet. It's sort of a hard thing to describe, in the sense that, a lot of people talk about being hungry. You got to be hungry. You got to really, really, really want it. And for me, it wasn't necessarily. I mean, I wanted it, but it was almost more of a need. Like like, for me, it took me, like, I wasn't, it was hard. It was hard growing up in Vermont. I felt really isolated. I didn't, and so to some degree, art was an escape, to a degree. But there was this other, it was like a need, and it was like air or food, where I felt like I had to draw. Like it wasn't even a, like, yeah, that's good to do. Like, I felt like I had to. And so the story I was talking about was, I would go to school, and early, I think I want to say the first 2 years of school, I went to school, and then I came back to Vermont, and I got like a summer job, and I had pretty good summer jobs. I didn't have those really, heinous ones where, whatever, I didn't have to clean bathrooms or whatever. But I worked at this aerospace plant where my dad actually, he worked his entire life. It was, at that time, it was called Simmons Precision. And So I got a summer job doing inventory, and it was just mind-numbing. It wasn't horrible. It wasn't some Dickensian workhouse, but it was just kind of mind-numbing stuff that nobody else wanted to do. And that's why you would give it to, a high school student or someone just out of high school. And so I would have to do things, or somebody would give me this little box that was like about the size of a pack of cigarettes, and it was full of tiny washers. And I would have to just pour them out on the counter and take like a playing card or something and just count them all, because they were too small to weigh on a scale that could, because they had special scales for bigger things where it could calculate and get a ballpark, and that was good enough. But this, you had to just sit there and brute force it. And so I just did stuff like that. And it was all, it was just dull and not particularly interesting. But, I needed the money and everything. And so I did that stuff. And then one day, somebody in the crew, somebody on the team had a birthday, and they were like, "Hey, can you draw his birthday card?" I started drawing. So I said, "Sure." So I started drawing his birthday card, and all of a sudden, it was like, it was like I had been holding my breath for weeks. And so it hit me sort of viscerally, like, "Oh yeah, oh that's right. This is what I'm supposed to be doing," type of thing. And it was, it's almost like my body, just had, so it was like that for a while, for quite a while. And, I wouldn't want to, discourage anyone from going into this, like, you're not hungry enough, or you're not this, or whatever. I think everybody who wants to try should try. I mean, that's one of the reasons why, I flew across the country. Like, it felt so central to me that I felt like I cannot live the rest of my life not knowing if this would have worked. Like, it was basically like that. I have to, I don't care, because we were talking earlier. He's like, "Well, did you feel confident about it? Did whatever? Did you go in being like, oh, I think this will be okay?" And for me, that wasn't even an issue. I wasn't even thinking about success or failure. It was just like, I have to try. And I am not super brave adventure person. Like, I hardly, almost everything new. It's like, I don't know, but with that example, it was like, I'm getting on a plane, I'm flying across the country, I'm being with people that I know nothing about, I'm living in an area that I know nothing about, because I have to try this. I don't care if I hit the wall and go home a horrible failure, at least I'll know one way or the other. So it wasn't really even about fear or confidence. It was just like, I have to try. It was one of the few things that I was not tentative about. Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry. Yeah.
No, no. I mean, so basically, it's like, obviously, I don't think that's necessary. I think if you have, the stronger a love you have for it, whether it's the act of drawing or the love of the art or whatever, the stronger those things are, the the easier things will be, or it'll just help you along. If there's times, like, in general, I've been very fortunate. Like I say, there was always another job to go to. I didn't have long periods of waiting tables or anything like that. I've been extremely lucky in my career. But the one thing I would say is, because there's that saying that people go like, "Well, if you pick a job you love, you'll never work a day in your life." And I think I kind of think that's nonsense. In the sense that I think work is work, and yes, I'm not chopping down trees. I'm not lifting bags of powdered cement onto railroad cars. I'm not doing things like that. But it's still work. It's still hard. It can be frustrating. It can be exhausting or whatever, and it can be hard, in its own way. And so I feel like when times are hard, that love will help carry you through, when and that kind of thing. Um, because everything has its challenges and frustrations and disappointments. Again, I've been very lucky, but it is work. It isn't, I am very spoiled, but at the same time, it is work. And I feel like it's important to emphasize that.
Yeah, that's a good reality check. I think, a lot of times we talk about careers, now it's great, and but it's still work. And I did have a question. A student asked how you had the guts to fly out to California and just do this, and you kind of just answered it. So one of the question, feeding off that question, I'm wondering, and one of our goals at CFES is to expose students to as many careers and potential passions as possible, so they catch fire,
Sure.
like the way you described it.
Yeah.
I mean, is that something, for you to say you had no, like you had to do it, you had to find out if it was going to work out or not, to create that kind of desire to do something is one of our goals. Do you have any advice on how students might be able to? I mean, I'm sure you have memories of like falling in love with cartoons and the whole field. I'm just thinking of ways you could, students might be able to discover a passion like you did.
Yeah, it's a bit tricky because I feel like I'm kind of a special case in the sense of, like we were talking earlier, when I went to I'm sorry, not CalArts, when I went to Pixar and I started talking to other people, um, who weren't animators, and they were they're artistic and creative nonetheless. I mean, working on a computer is no less creative. It's no less, but I would talk to folks, and we had people from, like I say, all these different, like one guy, I think he worked with like Fire Inside and theater, and he juggled and stuff, and it was like crazy. It was like a crazy mix of people who are all really good at really different things. But the thing I sort of realized, that I know this sounds obvious now, but when you're a kid growing up, and when you're a kid growing up, you're like the center of the universe. So you think everybody is like you to some degree, or you think everybody is completely different, depending. But what I'm saying is, I didn't realize so many people would be like, yeah, I went to college and I studied literature, but I decided I didn't want to do that. And then I got into engineering and now I'm doing this or whatever. And to me, that was like, wait, you didn't know what you wanted to do when you were 5, you know? And I know that sounds ridiculous now, but at the time, like that was so natural to me, that it's hard for me to, it was hard for me to imagine people shifting gears and going on to other things. But I did know of people, even in college, there's this guy, Russ Edmonds, really, really good animator. He animated on The Little Mermaid. I think he did a lot of stuff with the Sheepdog. Really beautiful stuff. He's great. I mean, he was one of those people who came in and you were just like we were talking about, like inherent ability. We're just like, and like everybody was going to have to live up to this guy. Whoops. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, good. My headphones did something weird. I just wanted to. But anyway, but he had originally started out, he was going to be an engineer, and he went to college and was like, nope, I don't want to do that. And I don't know how he decided he wanted to animate, but he did and came to CalArts, and he was fantastic. He was one of the best in the class. And so I mean, I guess all I can really say is, I think if college isn't about finding your tribe, in terms of like, if you don't already know, that I would say just try to reach out and explore as many different things as you can if you're really not sure, in terms of like, I don't, if you want to be a fine artist, or if you want to make music, or if you want to, like, I'm going to lean on the arts here because that's I'm drawn to. But that's about all I can. I don't have experience with that, but that's what I would recommend. Is I would just say, try things that seem interesting and try as many things as you can, and see what sticks, throw it all at the wall and see what sticks, in terms of, it may not even be ability, because like we were talking earlier, like when I was in school, I got good grades and things, and the teachers were always pushing me, like, oh, you should take this advanced class, type of thing. So I was taking like physics and trigonometry and geometry and so forth, and algebra and all these things. And uh all, it, like with the sciences, I was good at it. Like I wasn't brilliant, but I was good at it. Like if I had applied myself, but I just didn't like it. I didn't want to do that. So I guess it's not necessarily always about, a gift per se. Like I didn't feel like I was gifted, but I felt like I could do it, type of thing. I just didn't want to. It wasn't interesting. It didn't make me want to keep going. It was like I took the classes, I got the grades, and then I was done. So, so I don't necessarily think it's about ability. I'm sure that will fold into it, but a lot of it come from like, yeah, I just want to do that more and more, or I want to do it all the time, or whatever. Like if it's filmmaking, or if it's cinematography, or if it, whatever, painting or architecture, that like the thing that just pulls you in. And it's, like as a kid growing up, and like you have the summer of yourself, right? 2 months seems like 1,000 years. So when I went to college, 4 years seemed like 1,000,000 years. But now I look at it and it feels like 10 minutes. So 4 years isn't necessarily a lot of time, but I would just try to keep your eyes and ears open. Just try to keep your eyes and ears open, and just explore things if you're not sure. I would, that's what I would say.
Yeah, that's great advice. I mean, it's good, two good examples of someone like you knew what you wanted from, age 5, and that was very fortunate. But then you had friends who thought they know what they wanted to do and realized, well, I don't know if I like this, and then they pivoted, which happens all the time. So I think that's good for students to hear that you have to go through a kind of a series of things to get maybe to what you want. And I have one question here, and we have others. We're coming up over the hour, but
Sure.
I'll send you some more. But this one, I think, the question's basically, when you came up, you described a little bit about your how animation was at the time, was kind of in a lull period, and then it took off. And the question is, how have things changed? So if you were a kid today, same love for what you have, but you're coming out into the world out of high school, and you want to have just success like you are now, what would you do now? Is it different, and how would you sort of approach it given all the technological and other changes that have occurred?
Well, the technology is the tough part, because I did not come to Pixar for the technology. I was not interested. I know that sounds weird, but I wasn't interested in the computers. Like I saw Tintoy and I saw Luxo, and I thought they were great films. And I loved how they used the medium, but it wasn't like I want to do that. It was like they did a good job over there. Like I wasn't, I liked to draw, and and that's one of the reasons I went into storyboarding, is because I still wanted to draw. Um so I think in terms of the technology, you can always learn it, because I went in, and to this day, I'm still not very computer savvy. I'm better than I was. I know a few tricks to do if things go wrong or whatever, but in general, I'm still not very tech savvy. That's another whole area in the company. So I would say the tools, whatever you're comfortable using. Like if you want to make, if you want to animate on the computer, and it's something where um, everybody is, when you ask any kind of technical question, I guess I should put it this way. If you ask a technical question, the answer is almost always, it depends. Where you have to know like, oh, well, and your answer, like what you finally wind up picking might be different, it's like, well, I like using Toon Boom, well, I like using this, and I like using that. Um, I think the best you could do is explore what seems to be the industry standard and maybe start with that type of thing, depending on what, like if you're going to build models or if you're going to rig them or if you're going to digitally sculpt or whatever you're going to do. Um, try to figure out what most people use is probably, because it's always, the hard part is it's always evolving. And that's the only thing I find frustrating about technology is it's never the same and you have to continually relearn it, where it's like, oh, well, that button's over there now, but didn't you realize in version 3 they put the button, now you have to go control alt shift semicolon, puppy foot, and you're just like, oh, really, I just got used to it. So but some people are fine with that. For me it's sort of like, I like having, growing up with, pens and pencils and whatever, I liked having a thing that I could master to a point and then go, okay, I'm done. Like, or whatever. Like I could continually get better. And for other people, that's just not an issue. Like some people like to look at a tool and go, oh, what's this under here? And they like to look around and explore it and stuff. Um, but anyway, I would just say, you know, um, because all of it's going to, like a lot of this stuff is going to come down to money, what you can afford to, like if you have to go to a library computer and stuff. And the hard part is a lot of digital work is just expensive to do. So that's going to be tricky in the sense of like, what can you get as a student? Is it robust enough to do what you want? Which I wish I had answers for those questions. I don't really, like I work on a big Cintiq, a big digital drawing pad, and I just draw. And, I deal with changes when I have to, when it's like, you just can't use that software anymore, type of thing. But I guess I would say, just try to find a commonly used tool and, just, if you're into that, just explore it. And if you're not, then just figure out, there's no shame in not knowing every single button. It's always, I mean, one of the things, even if the answer is often it depends, I've often found, at least at Pixar, I don't know about it out in the real world because but the technical people here at Pixar have always been super nice to the artists, in terms of, answering questions and helping out and that kind of thing. Um, because it is, I mean, even for people who know it, it's frustrating. So, like I say, I would just find what you can afford, find things that are commonly used, and just start playing, I guess, to some degree. And then, the quicker I think you can get to, I don't know, just try those things. So much of it depends on what your goal is, but
Mhm.
but that's my global advice for what it's worth.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think that if the passion's there for it, and you'll kind of figure out the other things as you go along to make
Yeah.
it work. But yeah, this has been really informative, and I think that we really appreciate the way you took it from when your initial love of it and kind of how your career sort of ebbed and flowed, and you got to where you're at now, and just the advice you gave about periods where you wanted to keep moving forward to meet your goals was incredibly helpful. So we really appreciate the time. And I've got some other questions. If you're good, I can email them to you. Some students, if they have other questions, if that's okay with you.
Oh, if you want to email, you mean text me or something, or
Yeah, I
I
could
should
just
actually.
no, after when I get them together, I can email you
Oh,
if
I
you have
see.
time to
Sure.
answer. That'd be awesome.
Sorry, I left my share on there, but
It's all good.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think the only thing, and I think it. I mean, I've been lucky that there's the industry has been robust enough, but I would say if the advice applies, if you get your foot in somewhere, just keep looking around and looking at what interests you, because the only thing I would not caution people about, but I would just want to remind people that, everyone sort of expects that you're gonna, like, well, you're gonna get a job at the Colossus, right? You're gonna work at Disney, you're gonna work at Pixar, some giant place. And one of the most satisfying decisions in my career came from choosing this little bitty place that, when I went up there, a bunch of my friends in 2D were like, on television were like, "You're doing what?" Like they didn't, and it's not like, oh, I'm so forward thinking. It has nothing to do with me going like, I see a future of, computer animation. It wasn't like that. It was basically just like the technology was almost in spite of it, in the sense of, I looked at people like Andrew Stanton and Pete Docter and John Lasseter and all these folks, super talented folks, and I went, these people are really good. If they're involved with this could be amazing. So to me, it was all about the people, and it wasn't about the technology at all. Which may sound weird, but that's kind of what it was. And so, and I do feel like there are, it gets a little frustrating at times where that homogeneity does come into play, where I feel like, you see this movie and that movie, and some of them, they're all kind of starting to look the same. But there are people out there, like Leica always does stuff that's surprising and unusual. Cartoon Saloon, same thing, where everybody else would be like, well, what's the word? Prevailing wisdom, 2D is dead. Nobody cares. And they're just like, no, we will do it. We want to do 2D and we're going to do full-length movies. And it's great, so there are different flavors out there, and part of it is just like what they can accommodate, what you want, is it something where could you get accepted and then go work in Ireland for a while, type of thing, because I think that's where they're based, and so to me it's like, just look around and just keep looking around, because that's how I got on board The Simpsons. I mean, fortunately, a lot of TV was like right there in LA, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, that's good advice. And for them to, especially from rural areas, to go sort of seek that out and get out there more and try and find that. Well, this has been tremendous.
Thank you so much.
I've enjoyed, it was fun to see the yearbook and go back for me personally, back to the beginning, but to see that, just how you got from, right over here across the lake to where you are now is I think inspiring for kids and gets them thinking outside the box. So we really appreciate it. And well, I'll follow up if they have emails, I'll send them to you. And
I'd be happy to answer other questions that people have. We've already gone pretty long, but I hope it was fun for people, and type of thing. So I hope it was fun and helpful and inspiring as much as it can be.
Yeah, absolutely. We appreciate it. Yeah, we'll share the recording with our other schools that had class at this time, and more kids will watch it. So thank you so much, and we will be in touch.
No problem.
Okay. All right. Take care. Thanks.
All right. You too. Take care.